The wind smelled of cold pine and wood smoke as Calvin Brooks eased his stiff knees out of his dent-scarred 1988 Ford F-150. It was the kind of December afternoon in Sycamore Ridge, Oregon, 2018, when twilight seemed to arrive before lunch, and the little mountain town lay wrapped in a hush that felt almost holy. Calvin, his silver star pinned permanently to the inside pocket of his canvas coat, had only one goal: a slice of warm cherry pie at Pierce's roadside diner, the place he'd trusted for 20 years. Yet the moment he crossed the threshold, a silence colder than the wind outside settled over the linoleum floor. Coffee mugs paused halfway to lips, spindleback chairs stopped creaking, and every eye landed on the gray-haired veteran with the limp. Calvin's stomach sank even before he saw Ronald Pierce, owner, short-tempered heir to a 50-year family business, step from the kitchen with a look that could freeze sap. Something ugly hovered behind those narrowed eyes, and Calvin's ordinary craving for pie was about to ignite a wildfire that would consume the town. Before we unravel what happens next, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and hit like plus subscribe so you don't miss the twists still to come. Trust me, Sycamore Ridge has secrets that even its snowdrifts can't bury. Snowflake, Calvin took his usual stool, third from the register, the squeaky one with a wobble he'd meant to fix for Ron months ago. He tugged his knit cap off, revealing hair cropped military neat, and managed a smile. "Afternoon, Ron. Coffee and that pie if there's any left." Ron wiped his hands on a towel that already looked angry. "Kitchen's closed for specials today," he muttered, voice flat. "No pie." "But..." Calvin glanced toward the pastry case. 2 gleaming cherry pies sat cooling beside a pecan. The veteran blinked. "Right there." Ron's jaw bunched. "I said kitchen's closed. Matter of fact, I'd appreciate it if you finished up and left. We're reorganizing." Whispers rippled through the diner. A teenage busboy froze mid-wipe. Calvin's chest tightened. The last time he'd heard that tone, he'd been on a checkpoint in Kandahar. "Ron, we've known each other since Clinton was president. Something happened." Ron leaned across the counter, towels claws now. "Something's been happening a long time, Brooks. Folks like you get handouts, medals, all that gratitude, and still act like you own the place. Not anymore. My diner. My rules." Every syllable rang with a bitterness Calvin hadn't seen before. He opened his mouth, shut it, felt the old ache in his reconstructed hip flare like a warning flare. "If you need space, I understand," he said quietly. "But throwing me out." "Out," Ron barked. "Now, or I call Deputy Schwab." The room seemed to tilt. Calvin slid from the stool, face hot. He wanted to shout that he'd bled for people like Ron, that he'd carried friends home in body bags so small towns could keep arguing about pie and politics. Instead he straightened, offered a curt nod to anyone brave enough to meet his eyes, and limped toward the door, past a Support Our Troops poster curling at the corner, past a high schooler whose cheeks flamed with secondhand shame. Outside, the air tasted of iron. Calvin gripped his truck's door handle until his knuckles whitened. Something inside him, dormant since the war, stirred awake. By sunset, the story had sprinted ahead of the wind. Sycamore Ridge had exactly one reliable gossip network: Margie's Salon, Pastor Whitcomb's Wednesday Bible class, and the Chamber of Commerce Facebook group where locals argued about plowing schedules and deer crossings. Within hours, everyone knew Ronald Pierce had refused service to a decorated vet in broad daylight. Some residents shrugged. Ron was always prickly. Others recoiled. The Ridgeview High varsity basketball team, who scraped tips all season to eat late-night burgers at Pierce's, voted to boycott. The Lodge No. 212 Veterans Club drafted a public letter. And in a downtown studio apartment, Calvin's only son, Elias Brooks, freshly minted U.S. Senator for Oregon's 5th District, read an urgent voicemail from Aunt Margie, disbelief icing over into resolve. Elias had campaigned on bridging rural-urban divides, on honoring service members forgotten after their parade. When the message played a second time, he closed his laptop, eyes hard. "Dad never called for help," he murmured to his aide. "But he doesn't have to. We're going home." Morning light spilled across Formica when Ron unlocked the diner, but the mood felt wrong, like stepping onto a stage after the audience had left. A homemade sign taped to the window read, "Equal service equals decent service." 3 news vans idled by the curb. Ron's stomach dropped. Sycamore Ridge hadn't seen this many cameras since the record elk migration of '03. He tried brewing coffee, hands shaking. First customer. A woman in Coast Guard blues who ordered water in a paper cup, stared at him with disappointment. Left. Second, Sheriff Lorraine Vega. She didn't order, just posted a notice on the bulletin board. Any discrimination complaints, call 555 civil. She tipped her hat, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. By noon, Ron felt cornered in his own establishment. That's when the bell rang and in walked a tall figure in a tailored charcoal coat. Senator Elias Brooks, flanked by a lone staffer with a manila folder. Gasps fluttered like birds trapped under the ceiling fans. Elias removed leather gloves, voice calm. "Mr. Pierce, I'm Elias Brooks, Calvin Brooks's son. We need to talk about yesterday." Ron's bravado flickered. "I already told your father. My father didn't fight insurgents to watch Prejudice march back in on 4-inch snow tires." The senator set the folder on the counter. "Your closed kitchen violated Oregon's Public Accommodation Statute, Section 659A.403. Civil penalties start at $25,000. Ron's breath stalled. $25,000? He could barely cover boiler repairs. Elias's gaze softened, barely. "But lawsuits only calcify resentment. I'd rather build something better." He flipped the folder open. Inside lay glossy architectural sketches and a purchase contract. Brooks Civic Foundation wanted to buy the diner at a premium, on one condition. Pierce must step away and sign a non-compete. The room waited, silent as snowfall. Ron's pulse hammered. Sell the diner? Betray family legacy? The offer felt both insult and escape. He croaked, "You can't bulldoze history." Senator Brooks held his eyes. "History isn't a building, Mr. Pierce. It's the choices we repeat or refuse to. Which path would you choose if you were Ron? Double down on pride or grasp a lifeline that could heal an entire town? Drop your answer below, smash that like button if the tension's got you hooked, and share so your friends can weigh in too. The next 15 minutes may decide Sycamore Ridge's future. That night, Ron sat alone in his office, light from a single bare bulb pooling over ledgers. Memories clung to the walls. Sepia photos of his father flipping pancakes for Sunday school kids. Newspaper clippings from the diner's grand opening in 1964. But alongside nostalgia lay a stack of overdue invoices and the senator's unsigned contract. He poured half a glass of rye, stared at the shaky reflection inside. My father fought Nazis, he thought. What would he say about me turning away a fellow soldier because why? The answer, the real one, scared him. It was decades of resentment inherited like a bad knee. Economic fears, shifting demographics, the nagging knowledge that the world no longer resembled the diner's laminated menu. Outside, a small candlelight vigil flickered on the sidewalk. Veterans young and old, shoulders touching, silence louder than slogans. Ron watched from behind the blinds, throat tight. The candle flames looked like tiny judgmental eyes, or maybe tiny beacons. His phone buzzed. Unknown caller. He almost ignored it, then answered. "Mr. Pierce," said a calm female voice. "This is Maritza Quill from Cascade Bank. Your loan covenants require public relations compliance. The recent coverage places your line of credit under review." Blood pounded in his ears. The diner's last financial safety net was fraying. After the call, Ron opened his father's old recipe box, found a Polaroid of them fishing Alsea Falls. On the back, Dad had scribbled, "Remember the river. Time only flows forward. Time flows forward. Maybe the diner should too." He stared at the contract again, pen in hand. The next morning broke pale and brittle, as if the January sky above Sycamore Ridge might shatter under its own frost. Ronald Pierce hadn't slept. When first light spilled across Main Street, he was still in the diner office, the senator's contract lying open like a verdict. He read the purchase clause again. Premium price, immediate transfer, non-compete radius of 20 miles, and felt an ache deeper than the one in his lower back. Down the hall, the big clock over the grill ticked towards 6 a.m. That was when his father used to whistle "Blue Skies" and flip the first pancake of the day. Ron stood, cracked the door, and listened. No whistling, no sizzle. Only the hollow echo of an empty dining room and the low hum of fluorescent lights. He pictured tables that should be full of loggers grabbing breakfast, school bus kids giggling over cocoa, deputies comparing overnight calls. Time only flows forward. The phrase clung like snow to boots. Ron looked at the pen in his hand. Sign and walk away? Or double down? If he sold, he'd be a Pierce without a peer, anchorless in a town his family helped build. If he refused, he'd risk lawsuits, loan default, maybe even foreclosure. Worst of all, he'd keep bleeding customers, and pride could not pay creditors. He pressed the pen to paper. Mid-signature, a knock rattled the back door. Ron jerked upright, heart thudding. Through the frosted pane appeared the silhouette of a broad-shouldered man in a shearling coat. Calvin Brooks. For a beat, Ron considered remaining quiet, but the veteran rapped again. Firmer. Resigned, Ron unlocked the door. Cold air gusted in. Calvin studied him, eyes clear but tired. Morning, Ron. Ron swallowed. Calvin, I wasn't expecting you. I figured. Calvin stepped inside, shut the door. He carried no anger in his posture, just gravity, as though he'd walked miles bearing invisible weight. I'm not here to fight. He held up a thermos. Brought coffee. Figured the pot in here was off limits. Ron's cheeks flushed. I, still brew the same house blend. Not why I'm here. Calvin unscrewed the thermos lid, poured steaming liquid into 2 enamel cups he'd apparently brought as well. I heard about the offer. My son's foundation, right? Ron nodded, shoulders sagging. He didn't waste time. Calvin passed him a cup. He moves fast because the world changes slow. He blew on his own coffee. Listen, Ron. 20 years I've eaten your pie. 20 years I've watched deer mounts go up on that wall and your girls grow tall enough to pour refills. I know you're not a villain, just stuck. Ron bowed his head. I was wrong, Calvin. And stupid doesn't wipe away anything. No, it doesn't. Calvin sipped. But there's what comes after. You got a decision to make. I'm not here to twist your arm. I'm here because whatever you choose affects more than you. Ron managed a brittle laugh. Town's already lynched me on Facebook. What's left to damage? Plenty. Calvin set down his cup. Sycamore Ridge is small. Kids watch how we handle mistakes. They'll copy us. He tapped the contract on the desk. You sign, you give them a lesson in humility. You refuse, maybe you still find a path. But it's steeper and they'll watch that too. Ron stared at his father's Polaroid on the wall. 2 anglers frozen mid-grin, the river behind them gleaming. He thought of late-night arguments about outsiders taking over, of guilt he'd never voiced about losing staff when sales dipped, of watching his eldest daughter leave for college in Portland and never quite come back because the town felt too small, too rigid. He lifted the pen again, hand suddenly steady, and scrawled his full name. Calvin exhaled as though setting down a rucksack. Thank you. But Ron wasn't finished. He flipped another page, a personal apology the senator required for public record, and signed that too. Then, with trembling fingers, he produced a plain envelope, inked a note, and slid it across the desk. Severance checks, he said. Every employee, all tips doubled. Calvin's eyes softened. You sure? My dad always said pay your debts before Judgment Day. Ron forced a smile. Feels like Judgment Day. Calvin gripped his shoulder, gentle, firm. Feels more like day one. By noon, Main Street buzzed with a rumor hotter than the wood stove at Whitaker's Hardware. Pierce signed. Phones rang. The high school basketball coach canceled practice to usher players to town hall, where Senator Elias Brooks had scheduled a press briefing. The meeting hall, paneled in knotty pine, filled within minutes. Farmhands in denim next to school teachers in cardigans. Veterans in earned caps beside teenagers tapping texts. At the front stood Elias, flanked by Mayor Sophia Renteria and Reverend Whitcomb. Behind them, an easel draped in a green quilt awaited unveiling. At precisely 1 p.m., Elias addressed the crowd. "Sycamore Ridgers, thank you for coming on short notice. This morning, Mr. Ronald Pierce elected to sell Pierce's roadside diner to the Brooks Civic Foundation. Effective next month, the property will close for renovation and reopen under a new mission." Murmurs, curiosity, relief, skepticism. Elias gestured to Calvin, who rose from the front row cane in hand and climbed the steps, an arduous but determined ascent. Father and son exchanged nods. Then Calvin faced his neighbors. "Folks," he began, voice carrying the quiet authority of a squad leader on a night patrol. "Many of you know what happened last week. Some of you were there. I could have answered hate with more hate. I chose otherwise, and so did Ron. Today we start over." He lifted the quilt, revealing an artist's rendering. A bright, airy café with picture windows, a community library corner, and a bronze plaque above the door reading "The Common Table." Applause rippled, tentative but growing. Elias stepped beside the easel. "The Common Table will operate as a non-profit cafe and resource hub. Profits after costs go to veteran services, job training scholarships, and a small business incubator for Sycamore Ridge. Anyone, regardless of background or bank balance, can come for a meal, pay what you can, or volunteer an hour." A hand shot up, Harlan Weems, logger and proud contrarian. "Pay what you can?" Sounds like charity soup line dressed in latte foam. Laughter trickled. Some nodded. Calvin answered, "Charity means one-way giving. This is reciprocity. You eat, you help. Maybe you wash dishes, maybe you paint murals, maybe you tutor math. Everyone brings something. Nobody leaves hungry." Mayor Renteria added, "The city will lease adjacent parking to the foundation for $1 a year, provided they host monthly town forums." Skeptics quieted. The idea was gaining traction. Could a pay-what-you-can cafe thrive where you live? Type yes or no in the comments. Then share this video so friends debate it too. And if Sycamore Ridge's gamble inspires you, smash subscribe. Not everyone applauded. Across town, in the back office of Ridge Supply Company, Gordon Feltz, real estate broker, longtime golfing buddy of Ron's late father, watched the live stream. When the cafe concept appeared, his jaw clenched. "Pay what you can?" he scoffed to his assistant. "That intersection's prime commercial frontage. They'll tank property values." Gordon had hoped Ron's diner would shutter and leave the parcel ripe for development. A quick service chain maybe, something he could broker. Now a nonprofit threatened his commission and, in his view, invited transients off Highway 26. He dialed a number. "Mason? Yeah, it's Feltz. We need to organize resistance, zoning variants, health inspections, whatever slows them down. You game." On the other end, Councilman Mason Clay, up for re-election, hesitated. Public sentiments leaning pro-veteran. "Gord. Sentiment shifts," Gordon said, "especially when folks learn taxpayers subsidize a hippie canteen. Trust me." Thus a new front opened. While builders drafted renovation plans, a quiet lobbying campaign began to clog City Hall with paperwork and doubt. 2 weeks later, demolition started. Volunteers tore out cracked linoleum, discovering warped joists and outdated wiring. Grace Tanaka, architect from Portland, donating her weekends, reimagined the layout. Skylights, reclaimed wood counters, wheelchair-wide aisles. Excitement buzzed, until the inspector flagged asbestos in the ceiling and century-old grease in vent ducts. Costs ballooned. Elias convened an emergency meeting in the gutted diner, now a maze of studs and hanging cables. Hard-hatted volunteers clustered around a portable heater while snow blew through missing windows. "Estimate jumped by 40 grand, Grace reported. "We either scale back finishes or fundraise, fast." Calvin rubbed his temple. "Scale back how? No skylights, cheaper flooring, maybe postpone library corner." The room fell silent. Every downgrade felt like a chip off the vision. From the shadows, Ron stepped forward, hard hat askew, paint on his boots. Since signing, he'd shown up daily, swinging hammers alongside everyone else, silent but tireless. "I have money," he said quietly. Heads turned. "Not enough for 40, but 25. My buyout plus personal savings. Elias frowned. Ron, that money was your cushion. It bought me absolution. Now let it finish buying everyone breakfast. He met Calvin's startled gaze. Please, let me do this. Calvin nodded, voice thick. Thank you. They still needed 15 grand. That night, Elias launched a GoFundMe goal. $15,000 in 10 days. The link spread. Local radio, church bulletins, even the rival high school hockey team shared it because vets matter. Donations trickled, then poured. 10 days later, the ticker hit $24,017. Enough to restore skylights and keep the library. The town's heart, it seemed, beat stronger than its fears, except in the offices of Gordon Feltz, where plans B and C churned. By early March, the frame gleamed, new windows catching sunrise like stained glass. The grand opening date, March 21, 2018, was set. Posters announced live music, free chili, and a ribbon cutting by World War II nurse Helen Madrid, age 98. But 4 nights before launch, a nor'easter of the Cascades howled down the gorge, killed the power grid, and, according to security footage, blew open a rear construction door. Morning crews found shattered glass, spray paint across the mural in progress. Commies, go home. Tables lay overturned, flour sacks slashed, copper pipes stolen. As deputies roped off the scene, Calvin stood in snow-dusted debris, jaw tight, eyes blazing. Ron arrived moments later, took one look, and doubled over as if gut-punched. Senator Brooks's sedan screeched to a halt, headlights still on. The common table, before it even served a meal, had been vandalized. And somewhere downtown, Gordon Feltz sipped bourbon, reading an anonymous text. Done. Payment. His thumb hovered over reply. Deputy Lorraine Vega crouched beneath the security light at the back of the half-finished café, brushing wind-blown snow from a fist-sized shard of tempered glass. The spray-painted slur on the mural burned uglier now that dawn had arrived. Commies, go home. The red letters running where sleet had hit them. Copper tubing lay ripped from the boiler closet, and the kitchen floor looked like a drift kicked across the tiles. Inside, Calvin Brooks stood amid toppled tables, jaw clenched so tightly his reconstructed molar throbbed. The vandal hadn't just attacked a building. They tried to choke a dream before its first breath. Ron Pierce arrived, still pulling on gloves. At the sight, he sagged against the doorframe, guilt punching through him. My temper planted this seed, he thought. Now everyone's harvesting thorns. Elias Brooks paced in measured circles, phone at his ear. Governor, yes, hate crime task force resources would help. Footprints, tire casts, thank you. He pocketed the device, gaze sweeping the room. We open on the 21st, he said, voice flat with resolve. They can't stop us. Not with 4 days left. 4 days suddenly felt like 4 minutes. The security system had failed when the blizzard sheared a tree into the downtown transformer, but one camera on a battery pack caught a silhouette. A bulky figure in a hood, limping. Next to the figure, faint headlight glare revealed a pickup missing its right rear hubcap. Lorraine ran the plate shapes through DMV images. 3 local trucks matched. One belonged to Mason Clay's nephew, another to a seasonal roofer. The third, rust green Dodge Ram, right rear hubcap gone, was registered to Brent Horger, a journeyman carpenter whose last big job had been re-roofing Ridge Supply Company's warehouse. Horger works odd gigs, Lorraine told Elias and Calvin that afternoon in her cramped office. Spends nights at the Tilted Antler, brags about off-books cash. She tapped the vandalism photo. Height and posture fit. Ron, sitting beside Calvin, swallowed hard. If Brent did this, I hired him years ago to fix our walk-in. Paid under the table. Elias closed his eyes for a count of 3. Follow the money. Who would bankroll Horger now? Lorraine's lips thinned. That's what I aim to find out. News of the attack hit local radio by lunchtime. By sunset, every porch in Sycamore Ridge glowed with a flickering candle stub or a string of Christmas lights relit in defiance. Hashtag common table stands trended in Oregon by 9 p.m., and the cafe's GoFundMe surged another $11,000. enough to replace the stolen copper and pay professional cleaners to scrub offensive paint before dawn. On the 19th, 2 days before the scheduled opening, more than 80 volunteers formed a human relay, sweeping, sanding, repainting the mural under halogen floodlights. A Boy Scout troop hammered insulation while the varsity basketball team hauled scrap to the dumpster. At the center of it all, Calvin and Ron labored side by side, arms dusted white with drywall compound, their motion a kind of penance and prayer. High on a scaffold, art teacher Yasmin Ortiz re-outlined the mural's figures. She added a new detail unplanned in the original. 3 clasped hands, one dark, one pale, one weathered with age. Linking across the bottom edge, a silent vow that this time bigotry would not have the last stroke. But in a corner office above the Ben Franklin Bank, Gordon Feltz watched the surge of goodwill with sour dismay. His anonymous text, "Done. Payment," remained unanswered, and Brent Horger had apparently skipped town, spooked by morning news calling the vandalism a hate crime. Worse, Councilman Clay had begun wobbling. "What you mean you'll vote yes on the occupancy permit?" Gordon snapped into his cell. He paced past framed photos of ribbon cuttings. "We agreed delays could stall them past spring." Mason's voice quavered. Public opinion flipped. "My inbox is 90% in favor. Re-elections in May." Gordon hung up mid-sentence. Rage pinwheeled behind his eyes. If Clay folded, only hard evidence of code violations could gum the gears, and he had none. Meanwhile, bank investors were already probing why he projected commercial development profits on the diner plot 6 months earlier. He needed distance, fast. He called a disposable number. No answer. Deputy Vega found the break 2 blocks from the crime scene. At 3 a.m. on the 20th, she'd stopped at Baker's 24 for espresso. As she paid, a familiar limp shambled past the window. Brent Horger, dragging a duffel, heading for the bus station. Lorraine left her coffee steaming on the counter and tailed him. When she flashed her badge, Brent bolted, straight into a snowbank. In custody, he cracked within an hour. "I just needed cash," he muttered, wrists cuffed to an interview room table. "Didn't know they'd go nuclear over it." "They?" Lorraine pressed. Brent bit his lip. "Guy in a gray parka, thick glasses, paid me $2,000. Said make it look like outsiders, grab scrap to sell. He wired half before, half after." "Name?" Brent hesitated, then sighed. "Feltz. Gordon Feltz." Lorraine's pulse kicked. She slid a photo across the table. Brent nodded. "That's him." Sunrise of opening eve tinted the foothills rose gold when Deputy Vega, backed by 2 troopers, walked into Ridge Supply's lobby. Gordon stood at the counter instructing his bookkeeper to archive anything dated March. But the words died as handcuffs clicked. Outside, cameras captured the perp walk. Within an hour, regional news plastered local broker arrested in café hate crime across the web. Mason Clay released a statement condemning the vandalism and pledging support for the common table as a beacon of unity. Investors Gord had cultivated vanished like mist. Ron heard the news while installing the restored copper pipe. He sank to a milk crate, relief and sorrow warring inside. "He was Dad's friend," he whispered. Calvin squeezed his shoulder. "Good men make bad choices. Some pay steeper than others." Across town, Gordon sat in a holding cell, shivering as reality iced around him. No one called to bail him out. March 21, 2018 dawned clear. The storm cloud spent, the air smelling of pine and fresh paint. At 9:45 a.m. the crowd spilled off the sidewalk, a quilt of flannel, dress blues, puffer coats, and hijabs. A jazz trio from Portland played under volunteer-hung bunting. News vans boxed the next block. On the rebuilt porch, Calvin helped 98-year-old nurse Helen Madrid to a seat of honor. Ron hovered near the new brass espresso machine, apron crisp, eyes bright with nerves and pride. Mayor Renteria took the mic. 12 weeks ago, an ugly moment exposed fault lines in our town," she said, voice ringing above the chatter. "Today we write a different headline." She gestured to the ribbon, navy blue, stripe of cherry red. "Nurse Madrid, if you would." Helen, hands trembling yet sure, snipped the ribbon. Cheers crashed like surf. The doors opened. Inside, sunlight blazed through skylights onto reclaimed pine tables. The air carried cinnamon, bacon, and hope. A chalkboard read, "Pay what you can, give what you wish, everyone EATS." Ron plated the first order, stack of pancakes crowned with cherries, for Calvin, who insisted on paying full price and an hour of dish duty besides. A line of kids from Ridgeview High filed in next, dropping coins and a hockey puck emblazoned, "Thank you, vets," into the donation jar. By noon, the library corner bustled with toddlers. The job training desk signed up its first apprentice. The veteran support nooks scheduled counseling slots through April. Local skeptics who'd vowed never to enter found themselves chatting with neighbors they once ignored, sharing cornbread and stories. Late afternoon, after the lunch rush ebbed, Ron carried 2 coffees to a table by the new mural. He found Calvin studying the trio of clasped hands Yasmin had added. "Couldn't call it finished without you in it?" Ron said softly, passing 1 cup. Calvin smiled, eyes reflecting the painted hands. "Guess none of us were finished. We never are." They clinked mugs. Outside, children's laughter rose as a spontaneous snowball fight erupted on the green. Teenagers who had once split rivalry lines now dodging ice together. Time flowed forward, yes, but today it felt merciful and vast. Ron took a deep breath, the scent of coffee mingling with cedar trim, and let go of the weight he'd carried since the morning he'd said get out. In its place settled something lighter, stronger, a resolve to keep choosing better. Calvin, sensing the shift, murmured, "Welcome home, partner." News of the successful launch rocketed across networks. Photos of the packed café, Ron smiling beside Calvin, and Nurse Madrid cutting the ribbon graced homepage carousels nationwide. Donations to the Common Table Scholarship Fund topped $100,000 in 48 hours. A culinary institute offered paid internships. An East Coast nonprofit requested blueprints to replicate the model. In Salem, the state assembly fast-tracked a bill, proposed by Senator Brooks, to incentivize community common table projects with tax credits. And at the county jail, Gordon Feltz watched the cafe footage on the common room TV, face slack with a mix of disbelief and regret. He turned away just as Ron, on screen, told a reporter, "The lesson? It's never too late to switch recipes. Hate's bitter. Unity tastes like cherry pie." Long after sunset, the last customers drifted out, leaving Calvin, Elias, Ron, and Deputy Vega at a corner booth tallying volunteer hours and laughter lines. "Day 1 numbers?" Elias asked. Ron slid a ledger across. "Gross receipts 0, because people paid what they wished, but donations, volunteer pledges, and merchandise sales totaled more than any single day take in Pierce's entire history." Lorraine glanced at the window, where the mural glowed under street lamp light. Not bad for a joint some folks said would bring Sycamore Ridge to its knees. Calvin raised his water glass. To standing tall, they toasted water, decaf, chamomile, whatever was left, then sat in contented silence, each hearing the same soft sound. A river moving forward. Yet beyond the glow of the cafe, storm clouds still brewed. Gordon's preliminary hearing loomed, and whispers hinted that he hadn't acted alone. A stack of subpoenaed emails, currently sealed, waited on Deputy Vega's desk, names blacked out. What hidden hands had tugged at Sycamore Ridge's seams, and would the next tear be mended as easily? Answers would surface soon, along with a decision that might propel the common table onto the world stage, or fracture the town once more. Deputy Lorraine Vega locked her precinct door at 6 a.m. and set a manila bundle on her desk. Subpoenaed emails and wire transfer records tied to broker Gordon Feltz. One sender caught her eye, Norcrest Enterprise Holdings, LLC, a shell firm registered in Delaware 3 weeks before the vandalism. Its manager, Richard Clay Norcross, third cousin to Councilman Mason Clay and senior vice president of a national fast food chain eager to plant a drive-through on Highway 26. Lorraine's jaw tightened. So the vandalism wasn't just spite. It was speculation. A scheme. Trash the property, stall the cafe permit, purchase the parcel cheap from a bankrupt nonprofit, flip it to Norcrest for a franchise payday. Gordon had merely been the local glove on an interstate hand. She phoned the DA. "I've got conspiracy, campaign finance violations, maybe RICO. You ready to expand the indictment?" "Bring what you have," came the reply. "We'll nail every domino in that line." March 28th, the Jackson County Courthouse overflowed. Reporters jostled beside Vietnam vets in denim jackets. Social media influencers live-streamed from stairwells, and school civics classes filled the balcony. At counsel table sat Gordon, pale, suit rumpled, flanked by a defense attorney muttering about procedural motions. Prosecutor Daria Nguyen opened. "The state will show Mr. Phelps financed a hate-motivated attack, motivated by greed and executed through intimidation, to sabotage a community project." She outlined wire transfers from Norcrest to Phelps to Brent Horger, and emails promising Councilman Clay discreet support for permitting hurdles. Horger, in County Orange, testified first. Phelps said, "Smash the café, make it look political. He handed me spray paint, told me to tear out the copper to slow construction." His voice quavered when he faced Calvin across the aisle. "I'm sorry, sir." Gordon's counsel argued selective prosecution. "My client merely financed building supplies. He never intended violence." But Daria produced a phone recording, obtained via warrant, of Gordon telling Horger, "Make sure they can't open. We'll fix damages later, after property values drop." Mason Clay took the stand under subpoenas and cameras. He admitted knowledge of Norcrest but claimed fear of Gordon's influence. The gallery hissed. The mayor frowned. On day 3, Gordon accepted a plea: guilty to conspiracy, hate crime enhancement, 2 years state plus restitution. Horger received 16 months with credit for rehab programs. Mason resigned, avoiding charges by cooperating. As deputies led Gordon away, Ron Pierce watched, heart heavy. One man's greed almost erased a town's rebirth. Calvin laid a steady hand on Ron's shoulder. "We don't cheer cages," he whispered. "We just keep building bigger tables." The trial catapulted the common table onto national primetime. Late-night hosts riffed on Pie conquering prejudice. Morning shows flew crews to Sycamore Ridge. Calvin, Ron, and Senator Elias Brooks appeared on Good Day Northwest, telling viewers pay-what-you-can eateries had already sprouted in Bend, Boise, and as far off as Lexington, Kentucky, each guided by open-source templates from the Brooks Foundation. The cafe itself thrummed. Vets mentoring at-risk teens over omelets, remote workers tapping laptops under skylights, families whose cupboards had been bare the night before sharing chili without stigma. Donations poured, roofing companies, a Seattle tech CEO, a children's choir benefit. By August, the scholarship pot topped $300,000. 60 locals held new food service or carpentry certificates financed by cafe profits. Documentary filmmakers who'd filmed ribbon cutting returned to capture the courtroom aftermath. Their series, Table for Everyone, streamed to global audiences, translating Yasmin Ortiz's mural into dozens of languages. Letters arrived from South Africa, Poland, the Philippines. How do we start our own common table? Elias posted a step-by-step kit online free. In October, Calvin opened an email from the Norwegian Nobel Committee. It wasn't a prize, merely a request for detailed documentation of the Common Table's model for consideration in our deliberations on grassroots peacekeeping. Calvin stared, breath shallow. Ron rushed from the kitchen when he heard the coffee mug shatter. "Good break or bad?" Ron asked, broom poised. "Depends how you feel about Scandinavians following recipes," Calvin managed. Word leaked. Headlines screamed. Small town cafe eyed for Nobel. The town gasped, then grinned, then got back to work. Because lunch still needed plating and the Wednesday literacy tutors would arrive at 3. That winter, contractors demolishing Ron's inherited barn found a rusted footlocker beneath warped floorboards. Inside lay war ribbons, a pocket Bible, and 22 letters from Walt Pierce, Ron's father, addressed to Calvin's platoon mate, Private First Class George Holloway. One unsent draft made Ron's knees buckle. "Cal, if this reaches you, know I'm ashamed. You saved my life at K-Sun, and I repaid you with silence while men spat at you. Thought sticking close to my own kind would dull the guilt. Didn't. If this war's taught me anything, skins bleed the same. Maybe someday we fish the Alsea together, with our sons casting upstream. Walt, 1968. Ron brought the letter to Calvin, voice thick. He wanted forgiveness before I ever had the chance to refuse you pie. Calvin read it twice, eyes misting. Your dad owned his ghosts, he said at last. Let's bury them right. They framed the letter beside the mural's clasped hands, adding a plaque. Recognition is the seed of reconciliation. Visitors now paused longer at that spot than at the dessert case. Spring 2019 arrived with apple blossoms along the ridge and the café's first anniversary festival. 1,000 people crammed Main Street for bluegrass, craft booths, and a chili cook-off judged by Nurse Helen Madrid, now 99, who declared every pot a winner because civility tastes like cumin. In the afternoon, Mayor Sofia Renteria presented Ron a key to the city for demonstrating the courage to change in public. Ron accepted, then turned to Calvin. I can't carry this alone, he said into the microphone, unscrewed the key into halves, it was cleverly jointed, and handed one piece to Calvin. The crowd roared. Local newspapers the next day ran a photo captioned, "Two halves of the same lock. State prison, summer heat." Gordon Feltz sat across a metal table from Deputy now Captain Vega in a visitation room buzzing with fluorescent lights. She'd offered him the chance to sign a video apology to the town, a condition for early release to a work reentry program. Gordon looked gaunt but clear-eyed. Will they even listen? Listening's their habit, Lorraine said. Hate got drowned out here, remember? Gordon took the paper she handed, simple words. I harmed. I am sorry. I will repair. He signed. The video would run at the café's community forum next week. Volunteers had already discussed letting Gordon join construction crews post-release, earning wages toward restitution. September 4th, 7 a.m. Frost on the café windows. Calvin brewed the day's first pot when Elias's cell buzzed with an Oslo code. The laureates for 2019's Peace Prize, The Voice said, had been selected. The Common Table Project, represented by Calvin Brooks, Ron Pierce, and Community Liaison Deputy Lorraine Vega. Silence. Then a kettle shrieked because nobody moved it. Ron steadied himself on the counter. Lorraine, arriving for breakfast, blinked twice before laughing in one sharp burst. We're not peace prophets, she whispered. Apparently the world thinks we bake it anyway, Elias replied. They held a hasty town hall that night. The community voted unanimously that, should prize money follow, half would seed 10 new cafes, half would endow local housing co-ops. Calvin wrote the plan on a chalkboard under Yasmin's mural. Someone snapped a photo. 2 hours later, it circled the globe. Winter again. The cafe now closes every Christmas Eve at 6 p.m. sharp. Tradition. Volunteers stack chairs while Ron slices the last cherry pie of the year into irregular wedges for staff. Calvin stands by the window watching heavy flakes fluff the street. Far off, church bells count down the hour. Each note feels like water over stones. He turns. The original diner stool, the squeaky one, has been refurbished, painted robin egg blue. Upon it sits a bronze model of 3 clasped hands, cast from the mural, base engraved with a simple date. March 21st, 18. Ron pours coffee. Lorraine pins new photographs to the library corkboard. Smiling faces at cafes in Nairobi, Belfast, Sao Paulo. Elias slips in late, snow in his hair, waving a Senate draft. Bipartisan funding for 200 common table-style hubs nationwide. First bill of its kind. They gather at the center table. Calvin, Ron, Lorraine, Elias, Yasmin, nurses, teens, elders, newcomers. No speeches this time. Just forks clinking pie plates, steam curling above cocoa, quiet, contented breath. Outside, the Sycamore River hisses under a skin of ice, never stopping, always carving forward. Inside, beneath warm lamplight and the steady hum of conversation, peace feels less like a trophy and more like habit. Baked daily, served without price, eaten without fear. And the table, once born of fracture, holds them all.